He waited, unmoving, the dark hue of his skin drawing sidelong glances meant to look accidental. Polite smiles strained thin over suspicion. Polished announcements boasted first-class service, while his boarding pass felt like evidence against him in a trial he hadn't agreed to attend. Around him, travelers spoke in hushed tones of meetings and getaways, studiously ignoring the weight in the air that only he seemed to feel pressing against his ribs. They didn't know the quiet man they dismissed as trouble would be the catalyst for their undoing, that the empire behind their practiced civility would buckle because he refused to bow. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. If this glimpse caught your attention, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment about where you're reading from. I'd love to know how you see this story unfolding. Let's unpack the layers they don't want us to talk about. Marcellus Boone arrived at the airport early, the way he always did, polished and prepared. His charcoal gray suit hugged his frame neatly, the faint check pattern only visible when light hit it just right. He carried a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and his boarding pass in the other, projecting calm and order. The airport was alive with its usual morning energy. Families corralling children, business people hunched over laptops, retirees chatting about trips to warmer places. He approached gate 17 without rushing, stepping into the priority boarding lane meant for first-class passengers. His gaze went to the airline slogan plastered above the counter, something about comfort and world-class service. He allowed himself a small nod. He was exactly where he belonged. Ahead of him, the line moved smoothly. Gretchen Wyatt, the gate agent, was all charm and courtesy for the older man in khakis ahead of him. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Have a great flight," she chirped, scanning his ticket with a practiced flourish. She smiled wide enough to show teeth. Then she glanced at Marcellus. Her entire expression shifted. The professional warmth vanished, replaced by a blank, dismissive stare. Marcellus held out his boarding pass, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she lifted one hand in an irritated flick. "1 second, sir," she said, her tone turning brittle. He blinked but didn't move, lowering the pass slightly, waiting. Gretchen's eyes slid past him like he wasn't even there. She perked right back up for the next passengers, a young white couple holding hands. "Welcome aboard," she said brightly, taking their passes with both hands, scanning and waving them through like VIPs. Marcellus watched them go past, feeling his pulse thrum under his collar. The line shifted behind him. He felt the mood change, heard the subtle sighs, the shuffle of annoyed feet. He tried again, voice calm and polite. "Excuse me." She cut him off immediately, eyes narrowing. "I said wait your turn," she snapped, pitching her voice loud enough to make heads turn. Marcellus felt the air change. The people behind him fell silent, watching. A woman in yoga pants shifted uncomfortably and turned away with her child. A man behind her scowled at Marcellus like he was holding everyone up on purpose. Marcellus straightened his back, controlling his breathing. He clenched the handle of his briefcase a little tighter, the leather creaking faintly. Gretchen gave him one last glare before moving on to the next passengers. She turned the smile back on effortlessly. "Hi there. Welcome aboard," she practically sang to them, all sweetness and customer service. Marcellus stood there, heat rising in his face. He felt every eye flick back to him, judgmental, impatient, some even amused. He forced himself not to react. He had worked too hard for too many years to lose control here. He tried to think about the meeting he had at his destination, the people waiting for him. This was supposed to be routine, professional. He was supposed to be respected here. But Gretchen wouldn't even look at him now. She was busy, she said to the next family, helping them with their stroller, offering stickers to their kids. The line behind him kept flowing. He was the only one stuck, ignored, held in place like an intruder. Finally, after an excruciating few minutes, she deigned to glance at him again. Her face was flat and cold. "Boarding pass," she said, like it was a demand, not a request. He handed it over, without a word. She took it between pinched fingers, studying it like it was suspect. She scanned it. The device beeped its confirmation, but she didn't react. Instead, she squinted at it. "First class," she read aloud slowly, dripping with skepticism. He nodded once. That's right. She pursed her lips, made a show of flipping it over. You sure about that? Marcellus kept his voice even. Positive. She glanced at her co-worker, Aiden Slocum, stationed at the other podium. Aiden, can you come look at this? We've had issues before. Aiden sauntered over, smirk already forming. He didn't even try to keep his voice down. We've had scammers before, remember? Marcellus felt the heat rush to his face. His jaw worked silently. Around him, the line buzzed. He caught muttered words. Jesus, seriously? Come on. Holding us all up. Gretchen made a big show of scrutinizing the boarding pass, rubbing her thumb across the barcode like she was checking for forgeries. She said, long and drawn out. This looks weird. Marcellus's teeth ground together, but he kept his voice steady. It's valid. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the line behind him, raising her voice. Sorry for the holdup, folks. Just verifying something. She said verifying, with a mean, knowing little emphasis. The people in line shifted. Some groaned audibly. Marcellus felt the humiliation crawl up the back of his neck. Aiden shrugged, still smirking. Want me to call security? Might save us time. Marcellus's voice was a hiss now, quiet but sharp. That won't be necessary. Gretchen finally shoved the boarding pass back at him, barely touching it. Fine. Go ahead, she snapped, turning away before he even had a grip on it. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He walked forward stiffly, refusing to look at anyone, feeling the burn of their stares. A man in a ball cap shook his head and muttered to his partner. A woman scoffed and adjusted her scarf like she couldn't stand to watch. He walked down the jet bridge in silence, boots thudding dully on the metal floor. The adrenaline pounded in his ears. He forced himself to breathe evenly, keep his back straight. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him shake, but he couldn't hear them clearly over the pounding of his own heart. He replayed the scene at the gate over and over. The way Gretchen had refused to look at him until it was to sneer. The way she'd taken his boarding pass like it was dirty. The way Aiden had smirked while suggesting security. He could practically feel their eyes on his back even now. He adjusted his tie and tried to control his breathing. This was a business trip. He needed to focus. He reminded himself he had meetings scheduled with important people, people who respected his expertise. He needed to calm down. But before he could bury the anger, he heard a voice. Excuse me, sir. He turned. Gretchen Wyatt stood in the aisle beside him. Her smile was cold, predatory, and designed to look polite. She held a tablet in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. She didn't even try to hide the suspicion in her eyes. I'm going to need to double-check this one more time. She spoke loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Marcellus felt the heat return to his cheeks. He swallowed hard. We already did this, he said, voice tight, fighting for calm. Gretchen's eyes flicked to the passengers watching. Yes, well, she sighed dramatically, making it clear she was the victim of his supposed rudeness. We've had some confusion today. I need to verify your seat. She flipped the boarding pass over with 2 fingers, scrutinizing it as if it might have been printed off in a basement somewhere. Her brows knit together in exaggerated concentration. First class? Seriously? She laughed once, sharp and humorless. Marcellus's stomach twisted. He felt the other passengers staring, some with open curiosity, others with polite horror. One man cleared his throat in disapproval, but didn't say a word. Another leaned back, smirking, waiting for a show. Marcellus kept his voice low but firm. You scanned it already. Twice. Gretchen's lips twisted. Yes, but we can't be too careful these days. She turned the pass over and over again. We've had scammers before, remember? This last line wasn't even to him. She said it to Aiden Slocum, who appeared beside her, grinning like they were sharing a joke at the bar. Aiden snorted. Oh yeah, that one guy tried to use an old ticket. Thought he could just sneak in. Gotta watch these things. Marcellus's fists clenched on the armrests. He fought to keep his face blank. His throat felt dry, scratchy. Aiden leaned closer, stage whispering so loudly everyone could hear. Bet he just tried to print this at home. These fakes look real if you don't check them hard enough. Gretchen chuckled, flipping his pass once more before scanning it again with an overdone sigh. The scanner beeped confirmation. She frowned at the display anyway. "I don't know," she said loudly. "This is weird." She turned to the nearest passenger, a woman in pearls and an immaculate suit. "Sorry for the delay, ma'am. We're just trying to keep first class secure." The woman gave a sympathetic smile, sympathetic to Gretchen. She nodded understandingly. Marcellus felt a violent pulse in his head. His chest tightened so hard he struggled to draw breath for a moment. He swallowed it down, his eyes fixed on Gretchen. "Can I have my ticket back?" he ground out. Gretchen finally handed it over, but even then she did it with a flick of her fingers, making sure she barely touched him. She wiped her hand on her uniform skirt in a theatrical move, the corners of her mouth quirking with amusement when she caught Aiden watching. "There you go," she said. "Enjoy your flight, sir." She put acid on the last word. Aiden snickered. They turned away together, chatting quietly as they moved to the next row. Marcellus felt the whole cabin exhale, the tension dissipating. People returned to their conversations, but not without a last, lingering glance at him. Some looked away guiltily, others with open judgment. A man a few rows back gave him a slow, measuring look and shook his head once, as if disappointed. Marcellus could feel the story they were telling themselves about him. Troublemaker. The watching eyes of fellow passengers who had heard every insult but said nothing. He wasn't going to forget, but he had to get through this flight. That was the priority. That was the plan. He tried to focus on his meeting at the destination. He reminded himself there were executives waiting to see him, people who valued his time, his ideas, his work. But the door to the plane was still open, and the noise from the jet bridge leaked in. Boarding calls, scuffling luggage wheels, voices. He heard them coming even before he turned to see them. Gretchen's hard footfalls, Aiden's quieter shuffle, and another, slower set of steps. The gate supervisor, Delaney Cook. Marcellus's pulse jumped. Delaney's voice was measured but carried authority. He was older than Gretchen, his hair iron gray at the temples, posture stiff from years of petty power. He wore the supervisor badge like armor. Delaney stopped beside Marcellus's seat and cleared his throat with officious gravity. "Mr. Boone." Marcellus looked up slowly. He didn't bother pretending he was calm. His expression was granite. "Yes." Delaney's gaze slid over Marcellus like he was appraising livestock. He held out a corporate-issue tablet, tapping it once with a chewed fingernail. "We're going to need to verify your ticket again. There seems to be an issue." Marcellus's voice was low and dangerous. "We already did this. Twice. Your agent scanned it. It's valid." Delaney's mouth twisted into a patronizing, almost smile. "Yes. Well, there's been a technical error. The system isn't showing you in this seat anymore. Could be a glitch. We just need to make sure you actually paid." The words landed like a slap. Marcellus felt every muscle in his neck tighten. "I have the confirmation email. The receipt. It's all there. You scanned it yourself." Delaney's eyes flicked to Gretchen, who stood just behind him with arms crossed and an expression that said, "See, I told you so." Aiden was off to the side, poorly hiding a grin. Delaney held up the tablet screen so Marcellus could see the red error message. "You see? Not showing your name here. Barcode didn't scan properly." He shrugged like this was just an unfortunate fact of life. Marcellus didn't even glance at the tablet. He kept his voice measured. "It scanned green before. You know that. Twice." Delaney sniffed. "Sometimes people use copied barcodes. Screenshots. We've had problems before." He said it in the same tone someone might use to complain about rats in a basement. Marcellus felt his vision narrow. The edges of the cabin seemed to close in. He could feel the eyes of passengers on him again, curious, disapproving. He took his phone from his inner jacket pocket and tapped quickly. He scrolled to the email confirmation with the barcode, held it up. "Here, this is from your own airline. Paid in full. Confirmed." Delaney barely glanced at it. that doesn't prove payment." His tone was almost bored now. He shifted his weight, sighed. "We're just trying to resolve this professionally, Mr. Boone. If you can show us a receipt, an account statement, something that actually proves you paid, we'll be happy to let you remain in this section." Marcellus heard the low murmur ripple through first class. Words like "unbelievable," "just show them," and "hold us up" drifted to his ears. His hands shook. He forced them still. "I'm not showing you my bank account on this plane." Delaney's eyebrows rose, lips pressing into a thin, self-satisfied line. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to relocate to the economy section until we can verify this after takeoff." Marcellus felt something break inside him. He swallowed the rising acid in his throat. "No, I paid for this seat. I'm staying in this seat." Delaney's eyes hardened, voice dropping. "Sir, I need you to lower your tone." Marcellus hadn't raised his voice, but he heard the threat in Delaney's words. Gretchen actually smirked at that. Aiden made a big show of writing something on a clipboard, eyes flicking up to meet Marcellus's with mock innocence. Delaney shifted again. "We're documenting this as aggressive behavior. I'd like to avoid calling security, but if you can't comply, we'll have no choice." Marcellus felt the blood drain from his face. He couldn't believe this. He'd seen this play out before. He'd watched people be labeled aggressive for daring to speak, for refusing to shrink, for existing where others thought they didn't belong. He looked around. Passengers were watching with rapt attention. Some shook their heads at him in pity, others with disgust. He knew exactly what they saw. He forced himself to breathe through his nose. His chest burned with contained fury. He spoke carefully. Each word felt like a bullet. "I am sitting here. This is my seat." Delaney's mouth twisted. "Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The faster you cooperate, the faster we can resolve this." Marcellus ground his teeth. "You mean the faster you can humiliate me and shove me in the back of the plane?" Potential security threat. He watched them go, the huddle of uniforms moving to the galley, whispering in conspiratorial tones. Gretchen turned at the last moment, flashing him a parting smirk before ducking behind the curtain. Aiden gave him a mock salute with his pen, lips curling with amusement. The other passengers pretended to go back to their books or phones, but he could feel their eyes flicking to him, their whispers leaking through the hush of the cabin. He wanted to stand. He wanted to demand they explain themselves in front of everyone. He wanted to scream that this was his seat, his ticket, his right. But he sat there instead, every muscle quivering with the effort to keep himself contained. He had learned the cost of anger long ago. He wasn't about to pay it here. He forced his breathing to slow. He glanced at the window beside him, seeing nothing but a smear of airport lights and the blurred reflections of his own tight, furious face. Then he heard them coming back. Gretchen pushed the curtain aside with a practiced flick of her wrist and strode down the aisle, followed by Veronica Talley. Veronica was older, with a pinched mouth and a hard, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had the air of someone who had worked in customer service for decades and thought it had made her superior to everyone she served. She paused at Marcellus's row and offered that tight smile. "Mr. Boone," she said with the sing-song false kindness of someone who enjoyed being condescending, "we'd like to make this easier on everyone." Marcellus didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her, waiting. Veronica raised her eyebrows, feigning patience. "Look," she continued, "we understand there's been some confusion." She put a sarcastic weight on the word, letting it hang. "We don't want to escalate this. We want you to be comfortable." Marcellus ground his teeth so hard his jaw clicked. "Comfortable," he repeated. She nodded earnestly. "Exactly. So I'd like to offer you this." She held out a small voucher booklet between two fingers. It was worn around the edges, the airline's logo peeling. "It's a $20 meal voucher for use at any of our partner airports." She smiled wider, eyes narrowing. "A little something for the trouble." Marcellus didn't take it. He didn't even blink. Veronica let the voucher hang in the air for a beat longer before she let her arm fall back. She sked under her breath. "Most would be grateful for anything," she added, voice low but crystal clear, making sure he heard every syllable. He felt the burn of humiliation spread over his skin like fire. He could hear the man across the aisle snort quietly, the ruffle of someone's newspaper as they pretended not to listen while leaning in. Veronica continued, ignoring his silence. "We just want this resolved, Mr. Boone. Don't you want this resolved?" He finally spoke, voice scraping like gravel. "The resolution is me staying in my seat." Her smile didn't falter. "That's not up to you." She clicked her tongue once, signaling Gretchen. Gretchen moved past her, stepping directly into Marcellus's personal space, making a point of blocking his view of the cabin. "We're not going to keep delaying this flight," Gretchen said loudly, ensuring the entire section heard. "We have other passengers to think about." Marcellus felt the words slap him, each one a deliberate public condemnation. He saw heads turning again, eyes narrowing, passengers whispering behind hands. The quiet, awkward shuffle of people moving in their seats to get a better look. Veronica leaned forward, lowering her voice but making sure it carried. "If you'd like, we can escort you to economy ourselves." She gestured vaguely toward the rear of the plane. "We have room there. We're trying to be reasonable." Marcellus's voice was low, shaking. "I paid for this seat." Veronica's mouth curved in something that wasn't a smile. "We don't want to call security again." He felt something shatter in his chest. This wasn't an offer. It was a threat, and they both knew it. But before he could answer, Veronica turned abruptly and spoke to the entire cabin. She raised her voice with the crisp authority of someone who relished performance. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're experiencing a minor seating conflict due to a misunderstanding of the process." Marcellus felt the blood drain from his face. The words were a scalpel, a misunderstanding. The polite way to say it was his fault, that he didn't understand, that he didn't belong. He heard the disgusted exhalations, the tuts of irritation. A man in a suit leaned into the aisle to get a better look at him, eyes squinting in disbelief, as if assessing whether he really thought he belonged in first class. A woman in pearls tapped her husband's arm and whispered something he couldn't quite catch, but didn't need to. The phrase misunderstanding of the process became a banner, a public condemnation hanging over him. He was the hold-up, the problem, the wrong element in the wrong place. Veronica turned back to him, her eyes sharp. "We'd appreciate your cooperation so we can depart on time," she said sweetly, an executioner offering a blindfold. Gretchen crossed her arms, hip-cocked, waiting. Marcellus felt the shaking start in his hands, radiating up his arms. He forced them still by digging his nails into the armrests until the pain registered, grounding him. He swallowed something bitter. He wanted to shout. He wanted to tell them exactly who he was, what he had done to be here, what he had paid. He wanted to strip away their smug certainty with the truth. But he stayed silent, because he knew that was what they really wanted. Some were embarrassed by what they'd witnessed, he could tell, but it was the sort of embarrassment that didn't demand action, just a shifting of weight, a clearing of throats, a tight smile to pretend all was well. Others were less charitable, glancing over with undisguised annoyance, as though his very presence was an inconvenience, a taint in the immaculate promise of their upgraded ticket. He felt all of it, every subtle twitch of body language, every meaningful silence. The plane finally began to taxi. The seatbelt sign pinged overhead. He settled deeper into the seat, the cold leather pressing against his back. He tried to focus on the future, the meeting that awaited him, the presentation he would give, the terms he would negotiate. He told himself to compartmentalize. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Veronica's face pinched with false pity, Gretchen's satisfied smirk, Aiden's smarmy salute. He felt the humiliation all over again, hot and suffocating. The plane lifted, engines roaring, pressing him back into his seat. He forced himself to breathe through it, jaw tight, eyes forward. When the plane leveled off, he took his phone out of his jacket pocket and tried to check his emails. A distraction. But he couldn't focus on the screen. His vision seemed to shimmer at the edges, like rage was something visible, a field of heat distorting everything he tried to see clearly. He put the phone away. He didn't want to see the work emails, the polite subject lines, the questions he would answer like nothing had happened. He just wanted the plane to land. When it did, there was no applause. Just a collective sigh of relief from the passengers who had spent the entire flight steeped in unspoken tension. Marcellus remained seated until most of first class had filed out. He refused to move quickly, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him scramble or shrink. He was last to stand, adjusting his suit carefully, collecting his briefcase with deliberate calm. He could feel the flight attendants watching him as he stepped into the aisle. Aiden was there, blocking his path for a moment too long, pretending to organize the overhead bins. He made a show of glancing at Marcellus's face and then quickly looking away with mock innocence. Marcellus didn't say a word. He simply waited until Aiden stepped back, their shoulders nearly brushing in the narrow space, and walked past him, ignoring the muttered comment he just barely caught. "God, relax." The jet bridge was too cold. The air smelled of oil and tired humanity. He kept his head high, not making eye contact with anyone. At baggage claim, he waited, watching the belt drag by suitcase after suitcase. He recognized the faces of some of his fellow passengers as they grabbed their bags and left quickly, avoiding looking at him entirely, as though his mere presence was an embarrassing reminder of the ugly scene they'd witnessed. His luggage didn't appear. The belt slowed. Then it stopped. He stood there alone, the squeal of the rubber belt falling silent, the blinking red light finally dying. He looked around. No one from his flight was left. Just him. He let the silence linger a moment, then took a breath and headed to the airline's baggage service counter. The woman behind it didn't bother to hide her annoyance at seeing him approach. She wore the airline's uniform, a carefully pinned name badge reading Kelsey. She didn't smile. She didn't even straighten up. "Can I help you?" she asked in a voice that suggested she was certain she couldn't. "My bag didn't come through," Marcellus said flatly. He gave her his claim ticket. She snatched it from his hand, typing something into the terminal with a bored expression. She hummed a disinterested note. "Looks like it got rerouted." He blinked. "Rerouted?" "Yeah, sent to Denver." She didn't look up, didn't sound sorry. He felt his heart thump once, hard. "I'm not going to Denver." She shrugged with one shoulder. "Yeah, I can see that." He closed his eyes for a second, summoning every scrap of patience. "Can you explain how that happened?" She sighed dramatically, finally looking at him with half-lidded eyes. "Sometimes the system flags bags that aren't priority status." He felt the floor shift. He looked at her carefully. "I have priority. I'm first class." She snorted a laugh. "Guess not in the system." She turned back to her screen. "Can't help what it says." Marcellus exhaled, the sound raw. "How soon could I get it?" "Depends," she said, drawing the word out, clearly enjoying herself now. "Could be tomorrow. Could be 2 days. Gotta wait for the next Denver flight to turn around." She tapped the keyboard. "I can have it delivered if you want." He didn't trust himself to speak immediately. He swallowed hard. "Fine. Deliver it." She finally offered him a paper slip to fill out. He carried his briefcase in one hand, the handle biting into his fingers as he squeezed it too hard, willing himself to keep moving, to not turn back and confront them in the middle of the hall, to not throw it down and scream. Because that was what they wanted, wasn't it? The big, angry spectacle. The aggressive proof they could cite. The story they could tell later about the man who lost control because he didn't get his way. He had seen it too many times before. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He swallowed the fire in his throat, forced himself to think instead of the meeting waiting at the other end of this flight, the clients he would greet with a composed smile and a firm handshake, the terms of the deal he would review with quiet authority. But even as he pictured it, it all felt flimsy, fragile, like paper in the rain, because he knew that the story would follow him. The complaint note in their system, the smirks and whispers, the airline's record labeling him non-compliant, the recorded looks of passengers judging him, the knowledge that even if he sat in first class, they'd never really see him there. He tried to shake it off, rolling his shoulders beneath his suit jacket, but it clung to him stubbornly, refusing to be forgotten. When he reached the next gate for his connection, he paused a moment before stepping forward. He took a breath, straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks. He pasted on the polite, Neutral face he wore in business meetings. He moved toward the boarding area with calm, deliberate steps. The gate agent didn't even greet him when he arrived at the counter. She glanced at his boarding pass, scanned it without a word, and handed it back without eye contact. He felt his jaw tighten, but he kept it shut. He walked onto the jet bridge, hearing the boarding announcements behind him, the shuffle of tired travelers lining up, dragging their roller bags over the carpeted floor. As he stepped onto the plane, he saw Gretchen. She was waiting in the galley just beyond the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For a moment they locked eyes. Her lip twitched, not quite a smile. He felt the old, sour rage spike again, but he tamped it down. He tried to step past her without a word. She shifted to block him slightly, turning her body so she could lean closer. Her voice was low but not quiet. "We're going to need you to wait here for a moment, sir." He felt the heat spread across his face. "My seat is up there," he said, voice low but firm. "2A, same as before." She gave a little sigh, theatrical. "We know, but the supervisor needs to clarify something first." He felt a muscle jump in his cheek. Clarify what? She didn't answer. She turned her head slightly, signaling someone. Aiden appeared beside her with that same clipboard, tapping it with his pen like a schoolteacher about to scold a child. "Mr. Boone," he drawled, pretending to check his notes. "We've had some continued issues with your reservation." Marcellus felt his pulse spike. "No, you haven't," he said coldly. "You've had an issue with me." Aiden raised his eyebrows mockingly. "We're trying to be professional here." Gretchen's voice cut in, sweet but dripping with condescension. "We don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Behind him, the line of boarding passengers began to slow. He felt their eyes on his back, felt the hush fall over the jet bridge as people realized something was happening. "I have a valid first-class ticket," he said, enunciating each word carefully. "I'm sitting in my seat." Gretchen sighed again, long-suffering. "You're holding up the line." She raised her voice slightly, addressing the people behind him. "We apologize for the delay, folks. Just a seating issue we need to resolve." Murmurs rippled through the line. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." Another person gave a loud sigh. Marcellus felt the heat rise in his face, felt a humiliating prickle at the back of his neck. He refused to turn around. He refused to see their faces. Gretchen moved in closer, dropping her voice, but not the poison in it. "We can do this the easy way, Mr. Boone, or the hard way." Aiden's pen tapped the clipboard with little impatient clicks. "Security is right outside," he said helpfully. "We can call them if you want." Marcellus swallowed hard. He felt his fingers twitch around the handle of his briefcase. He imagined swinging it at Aiden's smug face, knocking Gretchen aside with his shoulder, shoving past them. He could see it in his mind, so clearly it almost felt real. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just breathed. Gretchen straightened up and gave Aiden a tiny nod. He clicked his pen and turned slightly to the side. Marcellus heard the words before he saw the phone. "Recording for documentation," Aiden announced in a loud, false helpful voice. The phone camera lens gleamed at him like an unblinking eye. Marcellus's vision tunneled. He heard someone behind him say, "Oh my God, are you serious?" Another voice, skeptical. "Is he refusing to move?" The phone kept recording, held just steady enough to capture his face, his rigid posture. Gretchen's voice was suddenly all customer service again. "Mr. Boone, please cooperate so we can help you to your seat." She gestured vaguely behind her toward the back of the plane. Economy, the bathroom row. He felt the burn of it in his bones. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The phone caught it all. Aiden's voice joined in a practice sigh. "Sir, you're making this difficult for everyone." Marcellus turned his head an inch, his eyes narrow slits. The boarding door closed with a final metallic clunk that seemed to seal his humiliation in place like a coffin lid. He sat rigid, his expensive suit wrinkling against the cheap fabric of the seat. He could feel every slight, every snide look, every muttered insult, playing back in his head like a highlight reel designed for maximum pain. The phrase, "back where you belong," throbbed in his skull like a heartbeat. He clenched his jaw, so tight it hurt. He felt the rage coil in his gut, hot and sharp, begging to be unleashed, to rise in his throat and scorch everything in sight. But he forced it down. He forced it to cool, to harden into something cold and precise. He adjusted his tie with fingers that trembled for only a second before going steady. He stared at the safety card in the seat pocket, reading none of it, seeing all of it. He heard Gretchen's voice behind the closed curtain, her laughter low and conspiratorial as she recounted the moment she'd escorted him back here, her tone thick with false sympathy that only made it more cruel. Aiden's deeper chuckle joined hers, the sound of the phone recording still echoing in his mind. He let them talk. He let them gloat. He let the passengers murmur, pretending he couldn't hear. He sat very, very still, a statue carved from spite and rage. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and drew out his phone. He unlocked it with his thumbprint, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes, turning them into pale, hard points of light. He navigated to his email app with practiced speed, ignoring the tremor that threatened to return to his fingers. He opened a new message, a field already populated with his assistant's address, the name a small comfort in a sea of disgust. He paused for only a heartbeat before typing the subject line in all caps. Proceed with termination of $3.1 billion partnership. He didn't even bother to add a body to the email. He didn't need to. They'd understand exactly what it meant. He hovered over the send button for the barest of moments, listening to Gretchen's voice carry through the thin plastic curtain. She was recounting the escort with smug, dramatic detail for some other crew member, all hushed giggles and stage whispers. He pressed send. The message flew off into the digital ether with a soft swoosh, an insignificant sound for something that would alter the company's trajectory forever. He sat back slightly, exhaling through his nose. He felt something shift in his chest, not relief, exactly, but a sense of decision, of finality. The rage was still there, but it was no longer directionless. It had purpose. It had teeth. He wasn't done. He thumbed to his contacts, scrolling until he found the name he wanted. The chairman of the board, a man he'd met over multiple dinners, who had praised his vision, who had shaken his hand with the firm, eager grip of someone who knew exactly how much Marcellus Boone was worth to his airline's future. He hit call. The phone rang twice. Then, astonishingly, it connected. He heard the older man's gravelly voice, tinged with annoyance, and the faint slur of late-night drinks in a corporate lounge. Boone, what the hell? I'm on the other side of the country. Can this wait? Marcellus's voice was calm, too calm. It was the voice he used in negotiations when the deal was already dead and he was just arranging the burial. No, he said. It can't. There was silence on the other end, the kind of hush that signaled the man was suddenly sober. What's going on? He asked, voice low. Marcellus let the silence stretch for a beat. He let sink in. He could almost hear Gretchen's laugh behind him, the hush of the other passengers pretending they weren't eavesdropping. He turned slightly in his seat, shifting to see down the aisle, watching a family wrestle overhead luggage while the father shot him an unmistakable glare of disgust, as if his very presence inconvenienced them. Marcellus's lips parted just slightly, and then the words emerged, clipped and lethal. I'm done negotiating. Pull the deal. The silence on the other end was absolute. But beneath that hum was a new tension, a nervous current that seemed to flow through the rows of seats around him like electricity. He could sense it in the shifting glances from the man next to him who had heard his quiet but lethal phone call, the tight, uncomfortable posture of the woman across the aisle who now seemed unable to meet his eyes after glaring at him when he was escorted back here. He could feel it in the sudden hush that spread like spilled ink when the flight attendants began moving with unusual urgency. Eyes glued to the tablets they held like they were lifelines. He didn't have to see the messages to know what they said. He sat still, controlling every breath, listening to the growing alarm he heard in the whispered exchanges at the front of the cabin. Gretchen was there, voice lower than usual, the false customer service syrup gone, replaced by an edge of panic. What the hell does this mean? She asked, not bothering to keep her voice from cracking. Aiden was peering over her shoulder, tapping at her tablet with frantic, useless jabs. "It's everywhere," he muttered. "Corporate. Comms. They're blowing up the crew channel." She hissed, "Check the source. Is this a prank?" He shook his head once, too sharply. "No, it's from corporate. Executive level." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Executive level? Over him?" She spat the word like it was poison. Aiden didn't answer. He just kept scrolling, eyes wide. Marcellus watched them over the top of the seat in front of him. His gaze unreadable. He saw Gretchen's shoulders stiffen as she read a new message that made her mouth open in a silent exclamation. She looked like she wanted to turn and check the cabin, but forced herself to look back at her tablet instead. Another flight attendant moved in beside them. This one younger, clearly new, panic obvious on her face. "They're saying it's urgent. Like level 1 PR emergency. They're calling it a meltdown. Do you know who he is?" Gretchen finally turned her head, eyes scanning the cabin with naked dread. Her gaze locked on Marcellus. He didn't move, didn't blink. She swallowed hard. "Oh God," she whispered. Aiden's lips pressed into a thin line as he read another message. CEO Marcellus Boone terminating $3.1 billion merger over in-flight discrimination. Holy shit. The words hung between them, heavy as lead. Marcellus watched the realization land on them like a stone dropped into water. The ripples spread immediately. He saw Aiden glance at him, face blanching, saw Gretchen's mouth tremble before she forced it still. She turned quickly, practically slamming the curtain shut between economy and first class, like that would somehow contain the crisis now leaking out in every direction. Behind the curtain, he could hear the frantic buzz of the crew conferring in clipped, terrified voices, the shuffle of feet, the soft but unmistakable buzz of their devices continuing to ping with new alerts, new orders. He heard phrases rise and fall. Corporate says apology. He's threatening full pullout. They wants to fix this. Now. He let it wash over him. Every word another tiny bomb on the raw burn of his humiliation. He let them scurry. Let them panic. Let them try to undo what couldn't be undone. He had warned them in his head as they smirked at him, as they blocked his way, as they recorded him like an animal in a zoo. He had promised himself that they would understand, that they would learn. Now they would. The plane rocked slightly as it found smoother air. A gentle chime went off as the seatbelt sign extinguished. A new presence moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. Marcellus recognized the uniform immediately. The captain, older, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth, his pilot's cap tucked under one arm. The man looked pale, beads of sweat at his temple that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. He walked with the careful gravity of someone trying to hold on to authority that was suddenly shockingly fragile. Passengers quieted as he passed, eyes darting between him and Marcellus. They could smell the blood in the water. The captain stopped at Marcellus's row. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcellus kept his eyes fixed on the man's face, expression calm, unflinching, daring him to speak first. The captain cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was steady but forced. "Mr. Boone." Marcellus didn't respond. The captain tried again. They knew. They all knew now. The story was spreading in real time, slithering through the aircraft like a rumor set on fire. He heard them pulling out their phones, saw the blue glow of screens lighting up faces with a harsh, impartial illumination of truth. He heard snatches of conversation. "Is this the guy? The CEO? I saw the post, some big deal collapsing because of him. Holy shit, look at this. It's on every news site already." He listened to it all, unflinching, feeling a cold satisfaction seep into the spaces where his anger had once burned like acid. His fingers tapped once against the tray table, a single, controlled motion, before going still. His phone buzzed once, twice, again and again, vibrating with the frantic energy of a world suddenly paying attention. Emails, texts, missed calls, notifications from media outlets. He didn't bother checking them. He already knew what they would say. Apologies from people who hadn't defended him. Outrage from people who didn't know him, but now claimed solidarity. Demands for interviews. Offers for statements. Journalists hungry for a quote that would be plastered above 100 screaming headlines. He let the phone vibrate itself quiet. He didn't need their words now. He had already said what he needed to say. He'd said it by refusing their fake apology, by refusing their seat, by refusing to be moved. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, rattling overhead bins and making passengers gasp softly in unison. He didn't move. Outside the small, smudged window, the first hints of dawn clawed their way over the curve of the earth, turning the clouds to molten gold. The seatbelt sign blinked on with a soft chime, the captain's voice crackling through the intercom with forced calm, telling them to prepare for landing. Marcellus could hear it in his voice, the strain, the embarrassment, the knowledge that every eye in the company was on this flight now, waiting for a final report on how they would contain the disaster. But there would be no containment. As the wheels hit the tarmac with a jolt and the cabin filled with a collective exhale of travelers who hadn't realized they'd been holding their breath, Marcellus sat motionless, fingers steepled, eyes open and unblinking. He felt the vibration in the floor dull as the engine slowed, the cabin filling with that awkward, anticipatory silence of passengers waiting to be released back into the terminal and their own lives. But today there would be no easy escape for anyone here. The plane taxied to the gate, stopping with a mechanical sigh, the seatbelt sign chiming off. Instantly passengers sprang up, yanking luggage from overhead bins, jostling for position, the thin mask of polite society dissolving as the real race began. Marcellus stayed seated. He watched Gretchen at the front, pretending to organize paperwork but failing to hide the tremor in her hands. He watched Aiden making himself small against the wall, face pale, tablet clutched to his chest as if it could shield him from what was coming. He saw Veronica waiting in the galley, arms folded so tight her knuckles had gone white. And when the door finally opened and the gangway connected with a metallic thunk, the flood of disembarking passengers slowed to a crawl as they saw what waited outside. News cameras, boom microphones, reporters bristling with questions like porcupines of curiosity and condemnation. A line of black SUVs with tinted windows idling on the tarmac. Airline executives in suits standing in a huddle, talking urgently into phones and gesturing with wild eyes at the door of the plane as if they could will it shut again. Marcellus let himself watch it unfold like theater. He rose slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his wrinkled suit with deliberate care, ignoring the curious stares of passengers pressed against the windows to get a better look. He picked up his briefcase, the leather handle familiar and grounding in his grip. He stepped into the aisle. The hush fell again, the passengers parting slightly like a curtain drawn back for his exit. He walked forward slowly, ignoring the urgent whispers behind him. He didn't need to rush. The plane wasn't going anywhere. The airline wasn't going anywhere. As he passed Gretchen, she flinched visibly. She opened her mouth, perhaps to stammer out some belated apology, but no words came. He didn't look at her, didn't give her the dignity of acknowledgement. He passed Aiden, who shrank back so far he nearly dropped his tablet. Marcellus didn't spare him a glance. When he reached the door, he paused. The first steps onto the gangway felt heavy, momentous, like crossing some final threshold. The flash of cameras met him instantly, questions thrown like stones. "Mr. Boone, is it true you canceled the deal? How much money is the airline losing? Is this a protest against racism?" He didn't answer. He didn't even slow. He walked past them all, the click of his shoes on the metal ramp the only answer he offered. Behind him, he heard the sound of the airline staff being intercepted. Reporters turned to them like wolves scenting blood. "Are you the attendant from the video? Did you call him aggressive?" Gretchen's voice broke on the word. I'm sorry, but the microphones picked it up perfectly. Aiden's voice cracked as he tried to explain, "We didn't know," and was immediately drowned out by shouted questions. Delaney, who had come down to the tarmac late, found himself cornered by cameras. He tried to wave them away, his face red, veins pulsing at his temple, but the words "systemic problem" and "pattern of discrimination" kept hitting him like hammer blows. The airline executives did their best to create a human shield, but it was no use. The cameras were too many, the questions too loud. Marcellus kept walking, ignoring the noise, the chaos, the spectacle he had created by simply refusing to move, refusing to accept their apology, refusing to make it easy for them to erase what they'd done. By the time he reached the SUV waiting for him, the first headlines were already up on news sites. He caught them in the reflection of someone's phone as they filmed him. Airline deal collapses over alleged racial profiling. $3.1B loss. CEO calls out systemic discrimination mid-flight. Passengers film racial dispute that crashes airline stock. He felt the faintest smile pull at the corner of his mouth, not of joy, but of something harder, more unyielding. Justice, maybe, or at least consequence. As he settled into the SUV's back seat, he didn't look back. The doors shut with a muffled thunk, silencing the shouts and flashes. The car pulled away. But outside, on the tarmac, the airline was still unraveling. Gretchen, Aiden, and Delaney were surrounded by reporters, their faces caught forever in high-definition shame as they were informed on camera that their employment was terminated effective immediately. Marcellus Boone sat quietly in the back row of the auditorium, hands folded over one knee, the tailored gray suit immaculate despite the heat of the stage lights. The hush in the large room was palpable, heavy with expectation, the air-conditioned cool failing to mask the sweat on brows or the nervous tapping of feet. The crowd had gathered for what the flyers called a restorative justice forum, hosted by the airline in an attempt to salvage its reputation. But in truth, everyone knew it was more than PR. The headlines had not faded. The stock price had only partially recovered. The $3.1 billion partnership remained dead in the water. And no one was forgetting the viral video anytime soon. The footage of Marcellus being forced down the aisle like a criminal, Gretchen's smug performance, Aiden's condescending narration, Delaney's rigid authority crumbling as they all realized too late who he was and what he could do. This event was their penance, but it was also his. Because Marcellus had not simply walked away. He had taken the payout the airline offered, millions upon millions in hush money they hoped would make him quietly disappear, and funneled it directly into something they could not control. He'd created a scholarship fund for underrepresented youth who wanted to work in aviation, pilot training, aeronautical engineering, airport management. He'd named it after his father, who'd once told him in a voice both proud and exhausted that the sky doesn't care who you are, son, just if you know how to fly. The program's logo was projected on the wall behind the stage, a stylized set of wings in gold and navy, simple, elegant, impossible to ignore. He watched it flicker there while the airline's new CEO, brought in to clean house after the board's bloodletting, fumbled his opening remarks at the podium. He was a clean-cut man with prematurely gray hair and the haunted look of someone who had seen exactly how fast a company's public image could turn to ash. "We're here," the CEO said, voice cracking slightly before he forced a steady, "because we know apologies are not enough. We know change is the only answer. We failed, not just once on that flight, but as an institution. We know that now, and we're here to show our commitment to being better." He gestured behind him to a semicircle of chairs where the former crew sat. Gretchen Wyatt, Aiden Slocum, Delaney Cook, Veronica Talley, all in sober clothes, no uniforms, no badges, no illusions. They looked older somehow, faces drawn, eyes hollow in the bright light of the cameras broadcasting this forum to every news channel that would air it. Gretchen was first. She stood hesitantly, clutching a sheaf of notes she barely glanced at before setting them aside, voice already breaking. I don't even know how to start," she said. Her gaze kept darting to Marcellus before sliding away, unable to hold. "What I did was wrong. There's no excuse. I thought I was being professional. I thought I was following procedure. But really I was humiliating him because of who he was, because of how I saw him." She wiped her eyes angrily with the back of her hand, shaking her head as if she couldn't stand herself. "I'm sorry isn't enough. I know that. I didn't just treat him like trash. I invited everyone watching to treat him that way too. I gave them permission. I made it normal. And I didn't even think about it until it was too late." A hushed rustle went through the audience. Some people nodded, others just watched grimly. Aiden was next. His voice was low, ashamed, the smirk that had once seemed permanently carved into his face replaced by something raw and self-conscious. I was recording him like he was some kind of zoo animal. For evidence, I told myself. But really it was power. It was mockery. I thought it was funny. I thought it would make me look good to my bosses. I didn't see a customer. I didn't see a human being. I saw someone I wanted to control, someone I could label. And I did. I helped write those notes. Aggressive. Non compliant punto. All the words they use so they don't have to say what they mean. And I knew what I was doing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His voice cracked and he sat down hard, shoulders shaking. Delaney Cook didn't speak at first. He just sat with his elbows on his knees, face in his hands. When he did look up, it was with eyes that seemed older by years. I thought I was the authority, he said quietly. I thought I was keeping order, but I wasn't. I was enforcing prejudice. I treated him like a threat because it was easy, because it was expected, because I knew I could get away with it. I'm sorry. I failed him. I failed everyone on that flight. Veronica Talley sat very still until the moderator called her name. She cleared her throat. I tried to buy him off with a $20 voucher, like his dignity was a discount meal. I thought I was so clever, so in control. I didn't see a man. I saw a nuisance. I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed that it took destroying a company's deal, losing my job, being humiliated on camera, to see what I was really doing. I'm sorry. She paused, breathing hard. I'm sorry, Mr. Boone. I know you don't have to forgive me. The silence afterward was suffocating. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. I turned to Marcellus in the back. He waited. He let the silence hold. He wanted them to sit in it, to feel the weight of what they had done. Then he stood, slowly, deliberately. The crowd shifted to follow him. He walked toward the stage with that same measured calm he'd forced himself to hold on the plane. The microphone was handed to him like a chalice, heavy with expectation. He didn't smile. He didn't soothe. He looked at each of them in turn, letting his gaze linger, forcing them to see him, really see him. The man they tried to erase with policy and procedure and smirks and silence. I don't forgive you, he said clearly, and a collective inhale swept the room. He let it hang, hard and cold. Because forgiveness is cheap. Too cheap for this. What I want is change. He turned to face the cameras. Justice isn't comfort. It isn't being told sorry until you stop complaining. It's change. It's making sure it doesn't happen again. It's knowing that if you do this to someone else, you'll lose everything. That's what justice is. He paused, scanning the audience, watching heads drop and tears be wiped away. He nodded once. That's why the scholarship exists. That's why the money went there. Not because it fixes what you did to me, but because it fixes what you do to them. He gestured to the projected logo behind them. It gives them wings, so they don't have to sit in the back of the plane ever again. He lowered the mic. The applause didn't start immediately. It had to fight through the silence. But when it did, it was thunderous. Marcellus stood there, accepting none of it for himself. He wasn't the hero. He was the warning. He walked off the stage as the former crew wept in their chairs, the CEO burying his face in his hands, the press capturing every second of it. And outside, the world kept watching. The end. If you've made it this far, thanks for reading. I'd love to know what you think about the story. Did any part of the plot surprise you? Which character stood out the most? And how do you feel about the ending and its message about justice and change? Let me know in the comments where you're reading from and what you think should happen next if this story continued. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like and subscribing so you don't miss future stories. Your support means a lot and helps keep these narratives coming. I'm always working to craft better, more powerful tales, and your feedback really shapes that. Looking forward to hearing from you.